My name's Jane Lewis, and I'm the woman who brought a multi-million-dollar company to its knees without throwing a single punch. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even raise my voice. But when I walked away, I took the one thing they couldn't replace: me. Let me take you back to the moment it all started, to a conference room in Ohio where the air smelled like stale coffee and corporate arrogance, and the COO decided to light a match he'd never put out. IT was one of those gray mornings in Akron, the kind where the sky looks like it's holding a grudge. I was 38, a logistics director for Vance Industries, a mid-tier manufacturer that made its name on a high-tech aerospace coating called AeroShield. My job? Keeping the supply chain humming for the one rare chemical that made AeroShield possible, a volatile compound sourced from a single lab in South Korea. I wasn't just good at it, I was the best. But to Bradley Thornton, our COO, I was invisible until he needed someone to humiliate. We were in a meeting with junior execs, the kind where everyone's pretending to care about PowerPoint slides while checking their phones under the table. I'd just taken a sip of coffee, bitter, with that powdered creamer aftertaste, when Brad leaned back in his chair, all Ivy League polish and inherited confidence, and said, "Jane, let's be real. You're just a cog in the machine." The words hit like a slap, not the kind that stings your skin, but the kind that cracks something deeper. The room froze. Two interns stared at their laptops like they'd just witnessed a car crash. A VP adjusted her glasses, avoiding my eyes. My pen didn't waver, my face didn't flinch, but inside, something shifted. Brad's smirk was the kind only men with trust funds and custom cufflinks can pull off. He didn't just say it, he performed it like he was auditioning for a TED Talk on how to be a jerk. I nodded, folded my notes, and let the silence do the talking. But here's the thing, I wasn't just a cog. I was the one who'd spent a decade building a bridge to that South Korean lab, learning their customs, their language, their trust. Without me, their precious AeroShield was just a fancy idea collecting dust. And right there, in that suffocating conference room, I decided I wasn't going to let Brad Thornton, or anyone, forget it. Growing up in a working-class family in Akron, I learned early that respect isn't given, it's earned. My dad worked the line at a tire plant until it shut down when I was 16, leaving him with nothing but a severance check and a bad back. I watched him shrink, not just in his chair but in his spirit, and I swore I'd never let a company take that much from me. That's why I clawed my way into logistics, studying supply chain management at night while working odd jobs. At Vance, I wasn't just managing shipments, I was holding the company's lifeline. But to Brad, I was a paper pusher, a name on an org chart, someone to dismiss with a smirk. I could have stood up and called him out. I could have listed every late-night call, every customs crisis I'd solved, every time I'd saved their flagship product from falling apart. But I didn't. Instead, I let his words sink in, cold and sharp, and I started planning. Not to fight back, not to prove him wrong in that room, but to show him what happens when you pull the wrong bolt out of a machine you don't even understand. Understand why Brad's words cut so deep. You need to know what I'd poured into Vance Industries. I wasn't just a logistics director. I was the heartbeat of their supply chain. AeroShield, their golden goose, depended on a chemical so rare it came from one lab in Busan, South Korea. Nobody else could produce it at the purity we needed, and nobody at Vance could get that lab to even answer an email. Nobody except me. I didn't just manage a supplier. I built a relationship, brick by brick, across continents and cultures. 10 years ago, when I started at Vance, the company was desperate. The South Korean lab, run by Sujin Park, didn't trust American firms with slick pitches and zero follow-through. Procurement had tried everything: RFQs, cold calls, even a disastrous site visit where someone mispronounced Busan like it was a fast food chain. They called the lab difficult. I called that lazy. So I got to work. I stayed up nights reading about Korean business etiquette, memorizing honorifics, learning how to say partnership in a way that didn't sound like a Google Translate fail. I sent handwritten letters, not emails, and included small gifts: a box of Ohio Buckeyes for Sujin's team, a hand-stitched bookmark for her daughter's birthday. IT took 3 months, but Sujin finally called. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice sharp but curious. I told her the truth. My dad lost his job because a company didn't care about the people who kept it running. I wasn't going to be that kind of manager. That call turned into a contract, one I signed personally. The terms were clear. The lab shipped only through me. Not Vance, not some faceless department me. I became their point person, their trusted partner. I knew their production calendar better than my own birthday. I rerouted shipments around port strikes, coordinated customs during monsoons, even stayed on the phone for 6 hours once to clear a blocked shipment while Sujin's team scrambled. Those late nights weren't just work. They were personal. When Sujin's father passed, I sent a condolence letter in formal Korean, triple-checked by a translator I paid out of pocket. When her son was born, I shipped a tiny Buckeyes jersey and a bottle of bourbon for her husband. She called me Uni, big sister, over tea during a video call one rainy afternoon. That's what I'd built. Not just a supply line, but a bond. To Brad, though, I was a glorified secretary, someone who booked flights and shuffled emails. He didn't see the hours, the trust, the weight of a company resting on my shoulders. And that was his mistake. Brad's words didn't just sting. They lit a fuse. I didn't storm out or fire off an angry email. Instead, I sat there, pen still, face calm, and let the idea form. I wasn't going to beg for respect or prove my worth to a man who couldn't spell logistics without autocorrect. I was going to leave, but not quietly. I'd make sure Vance felt every second of my absence. By the time the meeting ended, with some marketing guy droning on about brand synergy, I was already scripting my exit in my head. That evening, I called Sujin. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm but concerned. "Jane, is everything okay?" she asked. I paused, staring out my apartment window at the Akron skyline, factory smokestacks against a bruised sky. "Not yet," I said, "but we need to talk." I didn't tell her everything, not then. Just enough to plant the seed. I was thinking of moving on, and I wanted to know where we stood. She didn't push, didn't pry. "You know we trust you," she said. That was all I needed. The resolve in my chest wasn't anger. It was colder, sharper, like the edge of a well-sharpened knife point. 2 days later, I typed my resignation letter. 2 lines, no fluff. I'm resigning from my position as logistics director, effective 2 weeks from today. Thank you for the opportunity. I printed it on thick ivory paper, clipped it to a manila folder, and walked it to HR like I was dropping off a lunch order. The HR rep, a nervous woman named Cheryl, blinked at me like she expected a speech or a breakdown. I just smiled and said, "No need for a party." Back at my desk, I started packing, slow and deliberate. A chipped mug from a Busan market, where I'd haggled for it during a supplier visit. A notebook filled with Korean phrases I'd practiced for calls with Sujin. A tiny jade turtle Sujin sent after I'd navigated a customs nightmare during Chuseok. And in the bottom drawer, a black folder labeled Primary Supplier Agreement. I slipped it into my tote without a second glance. It wasn't theirs anymore, it was mine. As I packed, I thought about the early days at Vance, when I was just a junior coordinator with big dreams and a chip on my shoulder. I'd stayed late, worked weekends, learned the supply chain inside out because I wanted to be undeniable. I wasn't leaving a job. I was leaving a decade of my life, of proving I was more than my dad's daughter, more than Akron's daughter. But I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I'd already emailed Rachel Nguyen, the CEO of Apex Composites, a scrappy Michigan startup I'd met at a conference. She'd impressed me with her no BS approach, and I knew they were hungry for growth. My message was short. "Interested in a supply chain consult? I've got something you'll want to see." By the time I left the office that day, Rachel had replied, "Name the time and place." The first crack in Vance's foundation showed up 3 days after I left. I wasn't there to see it, but Mia Torres, a procurement analyst who'd been my lunch buddy for years, sent me a cryptic text. "You didn't hear this from me, but it's getting weird here." I smiled, sipped my coffee, and waited. I knew what was coming. Sujin had emailed Vance's new logistics guy, Tyler Voss, with a customs clearance request, standard procedure, time-sensitive, legally binding. It sat in his inbox, unread, for 48 hours. By the end of the week, the South Korean lab sent a follow-up, Shipment delayed, pending authorized intermediary. That's when the whispers started. Tyler was the kind of guy who thought a logistics degree from a weekend seminar made him a genius. He'd shown up in my old cubicle with a vape pen and a grin, joking to anyone who'd listen. Logistics is just moving stuff, right? How hard can it be? He had the energy of a guy who'd once TikTok'd himself chugging Red Bull at a team-building retreat. Mia told me he'd laughed off the supplier delay, calling it some clerical mix-up, to the floor supervisor. Happens all the time in Asian ports, he said, like he'd ever seen a port outside a PowerPoint slide. I could have told him that Sujin didn't play games with paperwork, but I wasn't his babysitter anymore. The real blow hit a few days later. Sujin sent a second email, short and sharp. All future shipments are suspended until our authorized representative resumes negotiations. Thank you. No fluff, no apologies, just Korean business etiquette, where silence is a polite way to say you're screwed. Tyler tried calling, then WhatsApp, then begging through a translator. Radio silence. Mia forwarded me a Slack thread where the production team was losing it. Why's the raw material late? Are we shutting down line 2? Tyler's response was a shrug emoji and a promise to escalate. Good luck escalating when the only person the supplier trusted was already halfway out the door. Meanwhile, I was in Michigan, sitting across from Rachel and Gwen in Apex Composites' modest office. It wasn't flashy, no glass walls or artisanal coffee machines, but it felt alive, like a place where people actually cared about the work. I laid out the basics. I could secure the South Korean chemical for their new coating product, Skypulse. Rachel leaned forward, eyes sharp. How exclusive is this relationship? She asked. I slid the black folder across the table, the one with the supplier agreement. Exclusive enough, I said. But it comes with me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope, not the desperate kind, but the kind that comes when you know you're holding all the cards. By the next Monday, Vance Industries was unraveling. The factory floor, usually a symphony of clanging machines and shouting supervisors, was eerily quiet. Mia texted me a photo of line 2, silent, no hum of mixers, just workers standing around like they were waiting for a bus that wasn't coming. The South Korean chemical was now a week late, and without it, AeroShield production was dead in the water. Clients started asking questions, real ones, not the kind you dodge with a buzzword salad. One aerospace partner sent a formal warning, restore delivery in 10 days or we're out. I read the forwarded email and felt a flicker of something, not joy, but the weight of inevitability. Brad Thornton was still playing the part of the unshakable COO. At the morning ops call, he blamed global supply chain volatility, then pivoted to unforeseen Pacific weather patterns. By lunch, he was throwing shade at the logistics team, calling it a staffing transition issue. That one burned. Mia told me the floor crew nearly mutinied when they heard it, one guy muttering, "Transition?" Jane was the whole damn system. Tyler, meanwhile, was drowning. He'd sent a frantic escalation email to Sujin, which bounced back with an auto-reply about contractual compliance. He tried LinkedIn messaging her assistant. Left on read. Poor kid probably thought ghosting was just for dating apps. The Slack channels were a mess. Why are buffers shrinking? One manager posted. Is Project AeroShield scrapped? Another asked. Someone leaked that a second client was reevaluating their contract. Brad held a town hall, tie crooked, voice cracking like a teenager's. This is just a hiccup, he said, sweat beading on his forehead. Procurement's a team effort. Someone in the back coughed the word cog, loud enough to turn heads. I wasn't there, but Mia's play-by-play made me wish I'd seen it. A floor supervisor walked out mid-shift, tossing his badge on the break room table with a "I'm not sinking with this ship." Back in Michigan, I was sketching out Apex Composites' supply chain overhaul. Rachel and her team were all in, no bureaucracy, no egos, just a hunger to get it right. I showed them how to streamline customs with a broker I'd worked with in Busan, how to sidestep weak vendors, and most importantly, how to lock in Sujin's lab. I didn't tell them everything yet, just enough to prove I wasn't bluffing. When Rachel asked, "Can you really deliver this chemical?" I smiled and said, "Give me a week." In my inbox, Sujin had already sent a message. "We work with you, Uni. New terms?" That's when I knew Vance wasn't just stumbling, they were falling, and I was already building something better. A week later, I was in a glass-walled meeting room at Apex Composites, sketching out a logistics flowchart on a whiteboard. The air smelled like fresh paint and ambition, a far cry from Vance's flickering fluorescence and stale carpet. Rachel Nguyen sat across from me, her COO, a guy named Marcus, taking furious notes. I just laid out the final piece, an exclusive deal with Sujean's lab to supply the chemical for Apex's new product, Skypulse, a coating tougher and faster to produce than AeroShield. "This is a game changer," Rachel said, leaning back with a grin. "You're not just a hire, Jane. You're a weapon." I'd flown to Michigan the day after Sujean's email. Our call had been short but heavy, like a handshake you feel in your bones. "You left them," she said, not a question. "They didn't deserve you." I told her about Apex, about their lean operation, and big dreams. "If we do this," I said, "it's with you, same terms, trust first." She didn't hesitate. "Send the contract." By the time I landed in Detroit, Sujean had faxed over a draft agreement, her signature bold at the bottom. I slid it across Rachel's desk in a red folder, one line highlighted. "Raw material continuity via exclusive intermediary, Jane Lewis." Marcus whistled low. "Is this as locked in as it looks?" I nodded. Tighter than a bank vault. Back at Vance, the walls were closing in. Mia sent me screenshots of internal emails, each one a little more desperate. One from a floor manager. "We're 9 days behind on AeroShield batches." No word from logistics. Another from procurement. "Supplier says contract is non-transferable." Anyone know what Clause 5.2 means? Clause 5.2 was my ace, the one I negotiated a decade ago, binding the lab to me, not Vance. Tyler had tried sweet-talking Sujean's assistant, offering discounts and strategic partnerships. She'd replied with a single line, "Please contact our authorized representative." That was me, and I wasn't answering to Apex's product launch was already taking shape. I spent late nights mapping out delivery schedules, syncing with Sujean's team to ensure no hiccups. Skypulse hit the market with a LinkedIn announcement that made my phone buzz with notifications. Apex Composites unveils Skypulse, superior strength, faster delivery. It read, with a photo of smiling engineers and a sleek new logo. Industry chatter followed. They got the Korean chemical? How? I didn't need to answer. The machine I'd built at Vance was rusting, and I was already forging a new one. Stronger, sharper mine. Vance Industries hit the point of no return on a rainy Tuesday. I was in Michigan, sipping black coffee in Apex's break room, when Mia's text lit up my phone. "It's over. They're calling it." The aerospace client, the one with a framed contract in Vance's hallway, pulled out with a brutal 3-line email. "Due to repeated delivery failures, we are terminating our agreement effective immediately." 2 more clients followed, one of them signing with Apex after I'd helped Rachel draft their pitch. The dominoes were falling, and I wasn't even there to push. Brad Thornton's investor call was live-streamed that morning, and I watched it from a quiet Akron cafe, Wi-Fi strong, espresso stronger. Brad looked like he'd aged a decade in a week, tie loose, eyes twitching like he hadn't slept since I left. "We're navigating some temporary supply chain challenges," he started, voice thin as cheap paper. "Proactive strategies are in place." He threw out buzzwords like operational resilience and cross-functional alignment, but the CEO next to him just stared, lips tight, like he was watching a car crash in slow motion. The Q&A was a bloodbath. An investor asked, "Why's your supplier ghosting you?" Brad stammered something about vendor miscommunication. I sipped my coffee and smiled. Behind the scenes, Vance was hemorrhaging. Mia forwarded me a thread from a manager. "Legal says we can't force the supplier to ship. Clause 5.2 ties it to Jane." Another from Brad to the CEO, sent in the middle of the night. I didn't know the contract was locked to her. "We're exposed." Exposed. Like I'd planned a heist instead of walked away from a company that called me a cog. By noon, Apex's Skypulse launch was trending on industry forums, with whispers about their mystery supplier. I knew the truth. Sujean was shipping to us now, and Vance was left with empty tanks and angrier clients. That afternoon, Vance's board held an emergency session. 3 hours later, Brad was gone. Administrative leave, which meant he was out before shareholders started sharpening pitchforks. Mia said his nameplate was peeled off his door by an intern before lunch. The layoffs started next, disguised as restructuring. Accounting clerks, floor supervisors, even the project manager who'd locked herself in her office, they were handed beige folders and sent packing. The factory floor buzzed with panic, Slack channels filled with rumors. Are we selling? Is bankruptcy next? I didn't answer Mia's texts. Not because I didn't care, but because I was done carrying their weight. Vance wasn't my fight anymore. It was gravity, pulling them down. The lawsuit landed in my mailbox a week later, delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be cleaning septic tanks. It was a thick packet, faux leather folder, the kind of thing Vance thought screamed serious, but just screamed desperate. The cover page read, "Notice of legal complaint. Alleged sabotage and misappropriation of supply chain agreements." They accused me of intentional disruption, unlawful retention of assets, and my favorite, breach of loyalty. They even spelled my middle name wrong. Twice. I flipped through it over mint tea, each page lighter than the last. Like a tantrum scribbled in legal jargon, I called Karen Delgado, my lawyer, a woman whose voice could make a boardroom flinch. "They're bluffing," she said, sounding almost bored. "Want me to bury this gently, or gut it?" "Gut it," I replied. "No mercy." Karen dug into clause 5.2, the one I'd signed a decade ago with Sujin and the old CEO. It was airtight. The suppliers shipped only through me, no successors, no transfers without Sujin's written consent. Karen sent Vance a single PDF, crisp as a blade, the original contract, Sujin's emails refusing to work with Tyler, my resignation timeline, and a polite warning about defamation if they pushed further. The lawsuit folded faster than Brad's investor pitch. No apology, no statement, just silence, the kind that screams defeat, the industry noticed. At a supply chain conference in Chicago, I overheard my name in hushed tones. She took the supplier and sank Vance. A director from a rival firm med me. "You're a legend. Can we talk consulting?" I didn't reply, but I smiled. Vance's collapse wasn't loud. No explosions. Just a slow bleed. They filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy on a dreary Thursday, a 3-paragraph press release blaming unrecoverable supply chain failure. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. Every line was a ghost of my work, my trust, my exit at IN Michigan. Apex Composites was soaring. Skypulse was the talk of the industry, with orders from 3 continents and buzz about redefining the coating market. I flew to Busan to meet Sujin, just the two of us in a quiet tea house, cherry blossoms framing the window. She poured jasmine tea, her movement steady, and said, "You were right to leave. They didn't know you." I nodded, the steam curling between us. "I was never a cog," I said, more to myself than her. "I was the oil, and I took it with me." She smiled, the kind of smile that seals a bond stronger than any contract. To everyone who's followed this journey, thank you. You've walked with me through betrayal, strategy, and a comeback that felt sweeter than any paycheck. If my story hit you, made you angry, made you cheer, made you feel seen, hit that subscribe button. Join us for more tales of breaking free, outsmarting the suits, and building something better from the ashes. Keep forging your own path, and I'll meet you at the finish line.